So the protests in Iraq have not stopped. Things have gotten pretty out of hand. Yesterday, the military and police, I guess people are calling them the security forces, which I guess is a nice umbrella term for, all the government goons walking around with guns and tanks shooting at people. That has continued. There's a lot of, if you look on Twitter, a lot of really gruesome video of people with their heads blown off and people who have been ripped limb from limb, people getting run over by, I saw one video of a woman, I believe, who got run over by the water cannon truck. So a lot of really nasty stuff going on. And as I said yesterday, the Iraqi government is not playing around. They're not doing this thing like the Chinese are doing in Hong Kong, to where they're trying not to look brutal. They just want to crush this uprising as fast as they can, and it's not really working. They seem to be just making people mad. And what I've noticed is the protesters, not only are they young, they seem to be men. They seem to be people who are not the poorest of the poor. These seem like, normal middle-class urbanites. A lot of these guys were wearing, name brand clothes, fancy brands that you would, people in the West would recognize, that I normally associate with, urbanites. The kind of stuff I wouldn't wear. These guys had very neatly trimmed beards and goatees, if they had any facial hair at all. They definitely seem to be the kind of guys who go, like once a week to get their hair cut to make sure it always looks the same. So these are not the dregs of society. These are, a lot of them just kind of seemed like pretty boys. But, fundamentally, these are guys that, live in the city. They don't have, I guess, great prospects for work. They're not very satisfied with the direction that the government's been taking things. And they don't feel like the politicians have lived up to their political promises, which, that's a perennial statement. But today, things have escalated. The situation's gotten quite a bit worse, because now there are snipers killing civilians. So not only do we already have pretty much confirmed at this point at least 100 people dead, it's probably a lot more than 100 people, but now there's snipers on the rooftops of Baghdad. At least that's the accusation. I have seen videos, and it's hard to tell when you're watching a video where the gunfire is coming from. But these people seem to think they're snipers. Of course, there's not direct video of someone like sitting up on a roof with a rifle that I've seen, because it's kind of like if you've got your camera pointed at the sniper, he's probably got his gun pointed at you. But this is not a single source sort of thing. This seems to be this is not something that was going on yesterday. And it seems to be widely being pushed out now on social media by a lot of people, saying that there are in fact active snipers in Baghdad. And in fact, I believe even the Iraqi government has lended credence to this. And interestingly enough, you would think the Iraqi government would be denying this if they had snipers on the rooftops shooting down at people. But they claim that they don't know who the snipers are. That they are in fact there, and that they don't work for them. These are just this is some third party. So you've got the government, and you've got the people out in the streets, and then there's these guys on the rooftops just shooting down, and they're shooting at both sides. Apparently the snipers have hit military and civilians alike. And so I don't know if that's by accident, which it certainly could be, considering that these guys are firing into a crowd. It could be that they're accidentally hitting their own guys. But at the same time, it could just be that whoever these folks are and whoever they work for are just trying to stir up trouble and create more chaos in the situation and terrorize everyone on the ground. Now, the immediate speculation, and this is not, from Western media that I've seen, this is from people on the ground in Baghdad. People are speculating that this is Iran's doing, because, of course, they see Iran as being very closely affiliated with the ruling parties of Iraq, which is true. A lot of the folks in those ruling parties were exiled in Iran during the time of, Saddam Hussein's rule there. And so some people are alleging that these Iranian snipers, if they are in fact Iranian, were sent over into Iraq to try and help the government tamp down on the protests, because the Iranian government has an interest in seeing their friends stay in power there. And I must say that if their goal was to try and de-escalate the situation and make their friends look better, well, then they're doing a terrible job, because having snipers shooting down at unarmed civilians doesn't help the situation. And in fact, I think that it makes things much worse for the Iraqi government if they were in fact behind this, which, again, is why, even though they're denying that these are their guys, I'm not entirely convinced that it isn't, because if they were their guys, the correct PR move would be to deny that this is them. You don't want to admit that you have snipers shooting at unarmed civilians, but then again, if these snipers are shooting at both sides, I don't know who they could work for. It doesn't make much sense to me that Iranians would be shooting at the Iraqi army. Now, something else that I thought of when I was looking into all this is that this reminds me a lot of the Euromaidan protests in Ukraine back in 2014. And even though I have no evidence to support this, what this kind of reminds me of is that whole situation there when there were snipers shooting down at the Euromaidan protesters who were, just wanted Ukraine to be closer to the European Union and not be a part of Russia, the Ukrainian nationalist guys. And that, created a lot of martyrs, and people, rose up against the government about that, and that emboldened them. The snipers had the opposite effect. The snipers made the government look a lot worse, and caused them to lose support. And I believe that there is, obviously, I don't think they've proven this 100%, but there's been quite a few people who thought that the snipers actually weren't under orders by the government, but rather by the CIA. And while I don't know if that's true or not, that the CIA were behind the snipers in Ukraine back then, it certainly wouldn't have made sense at the time for the government to be sniping its own people from the rooftops, one. And two, the Iraqis now, why would they, after seeing what happened in Ukraine, also have snipers on the rooftop shooting at unharmed civilians, considering that that was such a big deal back in 2014 and that it was a major contributing factor to the fall of the government of Ukraine that was in place at that time. So to me, this is almost looking like a very similar situation. It looks like the same playbook. So I don't have any evidence to go on off this yet, but maybe we'll get some in a few years, and it'll turn out that the CIA did have some involvement in what's going on right now before our eyes. Because to me, this looks eerily similar to the CIA's game that they played in Ukraine. It is confirmed that the CIA was heavily involved in the Ukraine coup back then, and that they did want to install a more U.S.-friendly government there. And that they, manipulated those protests in order to achieve that goal. The same may be going on right now in Iraq. Of course, another analog could be, the lead up to the Syrian civil war, in which the Syrian government started getting into armed clashes with the civilians there, and that made them look very bad, and that triggered an uprising, which again was helped a lot by American arms being pumped in there, because of course back Syrians weren't particularly well armed. Now Iraqis are pretty well armed. The average, I believe, like I've said before, that they keep every head of household has to keep a rifle. So if the government is too aggressive, and I think they are being too aggressive right now, they may very well trigger a popular uprising against them that is not as peaceful as it's been over these last couple days. They may trigger a heavily armed revolt in which civilians want to take down the government, and in which we may see military officials starting to defect to the rebel side. And considering that the current Iraqi government is very close to Iran, I could see the CIA having a bit of a hand in this. If in fact, it will be interesting to see if we have the fall of this current government and perhaps the rise of a more pro-American government in Iraq. Although we don't really know what that looks like, because there really hasn't been a pro-American government in Iraq since, well, Saddam Hussein himself. Until the U.S. decided that he was an enemy, but he was the last America-friendly, primarily America-friendly leader that they had. So with that said, if you gained anything of value out of this video, I'd appreciate you clicking that like button and sharing this video. And if you haven't already, please do subscribe, because I do upload every day, and I'd hate to have you miss one. So I'll see you folks back here tomorrow.